The ledger burns in my hands, proof of embezzlement, proof of crimes. I stole it from Julian's office, but now Miller's chasing me through the rain, his boots splashing closer. The alley's a dead end. My backpack swings heavy. I swing it harder. Bone cracks. He goes down. But the real trap? The dean's desk drawer. The moment I hand him the evidence, the lock clicks. His smile says it all. He's known for years. And now? So does Julian. Word count, 80, but tight and punchy for audio. Adjust as needed. Rainwater lashed against the heavy oak doors of the chapel as Maya Sterling lunged inside, her sneakers skidding on the marble vestibule. Her lungs burned with the metallic tang of the storm, a sharp, electric scent that seemed to coat the back of her throat. Behind her, the rhythmic slap of Miller's loafers echoed across the quad, growing louder against the stone steps. The sound was heavy, deliberate, and terrifyingly close. She ducked behind a fluted pillar, pressing her shoulder blades into the cold, damp masonry. The stone felt like ice against her skin, a stark contrast to the frantic heat pulsing through her veins. The stolen ledger pressed against her ribs, a hard, rectangular weight beneath her soaked windbreaker. She pulled the book out for a fleeting second, its leather binding smelling of stale tobacco and rot. Her thumb flicked the corner of a page, tracing the jagged columns of ink where Julian Vance's signature met the university's endowment fund. The numbers were a confession in black and white, a paper trail that Julian thought he had buried under layers of prestige and ivy. Maya's breath came in ragged hitches, visible as faint plumes of mist in the dim, amber light of the vestibule. She could hear the rain drumming a frantic tattoo on the roof, a chaotic percussion that matched the hammering of her heart. Shadows stretched across the nave as a heavy tread vibrated through the floorboards. The vibration traveled up through the soles of Maya's shoes, a low-frequency warning of Miller's approach. She fumbled with her phone, the screen illuminating her pale face with a ghostly, blue glow. The camera shutter clicked, a sharp, mechanical snap that sounded like a gunshot in the cavernous silence of the chapel, as she captured the final page of crooked numbers. She didn't have time to check the focus. She just needed the data. Documentation was the only objective truth, and right now, it was her only shield. Maya. Miller's voice rasped from the doorway, thick with feigned concern that made the hair on her arms stand up. Give it over. You're out of your depth. The smell of bleach and industrial sanitizer preceded him, a sterile, stinging aroma that cut through the scent of incense and old wood. Miller didn't move like a man his size should. He was fluid, a predator who knew exactly how to cut off an exit. Maya didn't answer. She couldn't afford the breath. Instead, she bolted toward the side exit, her sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. The heavy scent of damp wool and panic clung to her skin as she burst back out into the deluge. The downpour swallowed Miller's shouts, but the pursuit remained a ghost at her heels. Every splash of her feet in the puddles felt like a beacon, drawing him closer. She reached the administration building, her fingers trembling as she rattled the brass handle of the side door. It gave way with a groan of protesting metal. She didn't stop until she reached the third floor, her chest heaving as she stood before the heavy mahogany door of the dean's office. Inside, Dean Michael Davis sat behind a desk so polished it reflected the flickering city lights like a dark pool of water. He stood, extending a manicured hand, his face a mask of grandfatherly worry. The ledger, Maya. Safety first. Maya surrendered the volume, the weight leaving her arms and leaving her feeling strangely light, as if she had just handed over her own gravity. The physical relief was momentary. Davis didn't check the pages. He didn't look at the signatures or the diverted millions. He simply dropped the book into a bottomless steel drawer and turned the key with a definitive, metallic click that echoed like a cell door closing. "Julian sends his regards," the dean murmured, his voice dropping into a low, vibrating drone, the funeral dirge he hummed when the world became too loud. He slid the key into his vest pocket and adjusted his glasses. "Go home, Maya. Dry off. Forget you ever learned to read a balance sheet." The betrayal hit Maya with the force of a physical blow, leaving her breathless. She backed away, her wet clothes suddenly feeling like a leaden weight. She had spent weeks gathering the proof, meticulously documenting every cent Julian Vance had siphoned away, only to hand it directly to the man who helped him hide the shovel. As she stepped back into the hallway, the fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long, rhythmic shadows that seemed to reach for her ankles. Subverted, Maya felt a surge of cold, calculated hope. She hadn't been entirely reckless. Before walking into the dean's office, she had stopped in the basement computer lab, the air there smelling of ozone and scorched dust. She had used the high-speed scanner, the snap hiss of the machine acting as a rhythmic mantra of safety. She had captured every single page of that ledger, every forged signature, and every diverted wire transfer. She had the digital copy stored on an encrypted thumb drive tucked into the secret lining of her bra. The dean could keep the physical book. She had the truth in her pocket. This was the smart play. This was how she would win. She walked out of the administration building with her head held high, the rain still falling but no longer feeling like a shroud. She had the evidence. She would go to the local news, or the FBI, or anyone who lived outside the reach of Crestwood's golden gates. She reached the quad, and for a moment she allowed herself to breathe. The sprinklers were clicking, click, mimicking the sound of a camera shutter. She felt a small, triumphant smile touch her lips. She had outplayed them. She had the data. She reached her dorm room and pulled the drive from its hiding place. Her fingers were numb with cold, but she moved with purpose. She plugged the drive into her laptop, waiting for the familiar chime of a successful connection. The laptop hummed, the cooling fan whirring to life. A window popped up. Drive G detected. Maya clicked the folder. Her breath hitched in anticipation of seeing those beautiful, damning images. The folder was empty. Maya stared at the screen, her heart skipping a beat. "No," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I saw the progress bar. I heard the scanner." She clicked Properties. Used space, 0 bytes. A cold prickle of dread danced across her skin. She pulled the drive out and looked at it. It looked identical to hers, but as she turned it over in the light, she noticed a tiny, microscopic scratch near the connector. A scratch she hadn't made. The realization crashed over her like a freezing wave. When Miller had tackled her in the alley, when they had struggled on the wet pavement before she climbed the fence, he hadn't been trying to take the ledger. He had been reaching for her pocket. He had swapped the drives. The struggle hadn't been a fight. It had been a sleight of hand. The drive she held was a blank decoy. The real evidence, the digital copies she thought were her insurance policy, were currently in Julian Vance's pocket. She hadn't outsmarted them. She had hand-delivered the only other copies of the proof to the enemy. She was left with nothing but wet clothes and a story no one would believe. The silence of the dorm room was broken by the sudden, sharp chime of her phone. A text message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. "Nice try, Maya, but we prefer the originals." The floor seemed to tilt beneath her. She wasn't just back at square one, she was in the negative. She had revealed her hand, shown them exactly how she intended to fight. and they had stripped her of her weapons before she even knew the battle had started. She sat on the edge of her bed, the smell of damp wool and failure filling the room, as the university's emergency sirens began a low, mournful wail in the distance. The sound of the sirens wasn't a mistake. Within minutes, the campus-wide intercom crackled to life, the feedback a piercing shriek that made Maya wince. Dean Davis's voice, usually so calm and academic, now carried a sharp, jagged edge of authority. Attention, students and faculty. We are entering an immediate campus-wide lockdown. This is not a drill. We have a report of an unauthorized individual on campus who may be armed and experiencing a mental health crisis. Please remain in your current locations and lock all doors. Maya froze. The unauthorized individual wasn't a stranger. It was her. Julian wasn't just taking her evidence. He was erasing her credibility in real time. She lunged for the door, but the electronic lock clicked shut before her hand could reach the lever. The university's central system had cut her off. She was a prisoner in her own room, framed as a threat to the very people she was trying to protect. She scrambled to her window, looking down at the quad. The emerald green grass, so bright it looked fake, was now crawling with security. She saw James Taylor, the guard who always checked his reflection in the glass doors, jogging across the lawn with a heavy flashlight held like a club. He looked up toward her window, and Maya ducked back into the shadows. The questioning guard was looking for her, and he wasn't asking questions anymore. The air in the room grew heavy, the scent of the storm outside replaced by the sterile, recycled air of the ventilation system. Maya realized she couldn't stay here. If she waited, they would come for her, and there would be no witnesses to whatever unfortunate incident Julian had planned. She grabbed her heavy backpack, the one she had used to hit Miller, and shoved her laptop inside. She needed a hardwired connection, something Julian couldn't jam with a flick of a switch. She remembered the laundry chute at the end of the hall. It was a relic of the building's older architecture, a galvanized steel throat that dropped straight to the basement. It was dangerous, cramped, and smelled of bleach and sour linens. But it was the only way out that didn't involve a monitored elevator or a guarded stairway. She crept to the door, using a small plastic shim she kept in her wallet, part of her just-in-case kit, to bypass the electronic strike. The hallway was a tunnel of flickering fluorescent light. Every 3 seconds, the pulse of a dying bulb revealed a shadow that vanished when the light returned. She reached the chute, the metal handle warm to her touch despite the chill in the air. She climbed inside, the cold steel biting into her palms, and let go. The slide was a blur of darkness and the screaming sound of metal against metal. She hit the bottom with a thud, landing in a mountain of oversized towels that smelled of industrial detergent. She lay there for a second, her ribs aching, listening to the distant metallic scraping coming from somewhere deep in the basement pipes. It sounded like fingernails dragging against tin. She rolled out of the bin and into the gloom of the basement. This was the underbelly of Crestwood, a place of low-hanging iron pipes and oppressive heat. Sweat immediately began to slick her skin. As she navigated the maze of boilers and electrical panels, her foot struck something hard, a shipping crate. It was tucked behind a false brick wall that had been left slightly ajar. The wood was stamped with Julian Vance's private estate address. Maya found a crowbar leaning against a nearby workbench and pried the lid up. She expected more ledgers, more proof of stolen money. Instead, she found lives. The crate was filled with hundreds of small, clear plastic bags. Inside each one was a driver's license, a passport, and a diploma. She picked one up. Sarah Jenkins, class of 2018, Another, Elena Rodriguez, class of 2016. These were the ghost graduates. Women who had been top of their class, women who had supposedly moved to prestigious positions in Europe or Asia, never to be heard from again. Maya's hands shook as she realized the truth. Julian wasn't just stealing money. He was stealing identities. He found the most brilliant, isolated students, took their research, and then erased them, using their credentials to publish his own work and maintain his status as a visionary. The women didn't move away. They were stripped of their names and replaced by Julian's ego. A heavy footfall echoed from the stairs. Miller. She could smell the bleach before she saw him. "Maya," he called out, his voice echoing in the humid dark. "You're making a mess. And I hate a mess." Maya grabbed a handful of the IDs, shoving them into her pocket. She didn't have the ledger, but she had the victims. She scrambled toward the server room, the high-pitched whine of the cooling fans growing into a throbbing migraine as she neared the hub. She reached the heavy steel door, her fingers slick with sweat as she punched in the override code she had memorized months ago. Inside, the server room was a forest of blinking blue lights and cold, artificial wind. She found the emergency terminal, the one hardwired into the university's mass alert system. If she could upload the scans of these IDs, if she could broadcast the truth to every screen on campus during the Founders' Day Gala happening right now in the ballroom, the lockdown wouldn't matter. The truth would be too loud to ignore. She plugged in her laptop, her fingers flying across the keys. The upload bar appeared. 10%. 20%. The fans shrieked, a mechanical scream that seemed to warn her of approaching danger. The door to the server room slammed open. It wasn't Miller. It was Julian Vance. He looked impeccable in his charcoal wool suit, his silk tie perfectly centered. He wasn't carrying a weapon, but he held a heavy brass trophy, a Teacher of the Year award, like a mace. "Maya," he said, his voice melodic and resonant, the sound of a man who believed his own lies. "We are crafting a legacy here. Why must you insist on looking at the dust on the floor?" He didn't wait for an answer. He lunged, the brass trophy whistling through the air. Maya dove to the side, the trophy smashing into a server rack with a shower of sparks and the smell of ozone. The monitors flickered. The upload bar stalled at 45%. "You're a parasite, Julian." Maya spat, backing away toward the emergency exit that led to the bell tower. "You didn't write those papers. You didn't earn that tenure. You just stole the breath out of better people." Julian's face contorted, his unblinking eyes turning predatory. He adjusted his tie, once, twice, 3 times. The mask was off. "Perception is the only reality, Maya. And right now, the perception is that you are a dangerous, broken girl about to have a very long fall." He swung again, catching the edge of her laptop. The screen shattered, the glass spraying like diamonds in the blue light. The connection was severed. The upload died. Julian stepped over the wreckage, his shadow looming large against the blinking lights. He grabbed her by the arm, his grip like a vice, and began dragging her toward the stairs of the bell tower. "Let's go, Maya," he hissed. "The gala is waiting for a finale." They ascended the narrow stone steps, the air growing colder and thinner with every flight. The wind began to howl through the open slats of the tower, smelling of rain and wet stone. They reached the top, the massive bronze bell dominating the space, its surface reflecting a warped, distorted version of the campus below. Maya was pushed toward the ledge, the drop a terrifying void of darkness and rain. She looked back, hoping for a miracle, and saw a figure standing in the doorway. "Sarah!" Maya gasped. Her roommate stood there, holding the digital camera Maya had used in the chapel. "Sarah, Help me. He's insane. Sarah Johnson didn't move. She stood with her shoulders hunched, her wide eyes filled with a watery, pathetic kind of guilt. We didn't want it to come to this, Maya, she whispered, her voice trembling. But Professor Vance, he promised me the scholarship. He said we could be part of the legacy. Subverted. Maya felt a flicker of understanding. Sarah, the girl who said we because she was too lonely to be an I, had been the leak all along. But Maya had anticipated this. She had known Sarah was fragile. Sarah, look at what he's doing, Maya shouted over the wind. He's going to kill me. Do you think he'll let you walk away after that? You're a witness now, not a partner. Sarah hesitated, her gaze darting between Maya and Julian. She looked down at the camera in her hands. I have the proof, Maya. I took it from his office while he was chasing you. I have the ledger photos right here. I'm going to give them to the police. Maya felt a surge of genuine relief. Sarah was coming through. The people pleaser had finally found the right person to please, the truth. Yes, Sarah, throw it to me. We can end this right now. Sarah stepped forward, her face set in a mask of sudden, brave determination. She extended the camera toward Maya. Julian reached for it, but Sarah pulled back, dodging him with a grace Maya didn't know she possessed. She tossed the camera. It sailed through the air, a black arc against the gray sky. Maya caught it. The cold plastic felt like a trophy of her own. She had it. The evidence, the witness, and the location. She looked at the screen, ready to see the images that would end Julian Vance's career. The screen displayed a single image. It was a photo of Maya, taken from a distance, holding the stolen ledger in the chapel. Maya looked up, her heart stopping. Sarah, where are the ledger pages? Sarah's face didn't look guilty anymore. It looked cold. There are no ledger pages, Maya. I deleted them an hour ago. That camera only has photos of you stealing university property. Sarah walked over to Julian and stood by his side. She didn't look like a victim anymore. She looked like an apprentice. Professor Vance didn't promise me a scholarship, Maya. He promised me your spot. He said your research on the encryption script was nearly finished, and all it needed was a fresh name on the title page. Our name. The betrayal was total. Sarah hadn't been a pawn. She had been the architect. She had stayed close to Maya to ensure the research was completed, then handed the final pieces to Julian in exchange for Maya's life. Maya was standing on a ledge, holding a camera that proved her own guilt, with her best friend and her mentor ready to push her into the dark. You see, Maya, Julian said, his voice a low, vibrating drone that matched the hum of the bell in the wind. The foundation is solid, and you're just a minor tremor in a grand design. He stepped forward, his hand out to deliver the final shove. Maya backed away, her heel catching on the very edge of the stone. Below, she could see the lights of the Founders' Day Gala, the music a faint, distorted thrumming. She looked at Julian, then at Sarah. You're right about one thing, Julian, Maya said, her voice suddenly calm, the clinical staccato of a coder who had found the bug in the system. Perception is everything. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her smartwatch. The screen was cracked, but the haptic feedback buzzed against her wrist, a steady, rhythmic pulse. I didn't go to the server room to upload the files, Maya said, her eyes locked on Julian's. I went there to trigger a script I wrote 3 months ago when I first realized you were watching me. Julian paused, his hand inches from her chest. What are you talking about? The university's mass alert system, Maya said. I helped build the back end. I knew there was a back door for emergency broadcasts. When I touched that terminal, I didn't start an upload. I started a recording. She pointed to her lapel. A tiny, pin-sized microphone was clipped to the underside of her collar. Every word you've said since the server room, every confession, every threat. It's not being saved to a drive. It's being broadcast live. Suddenly, the music from the gala below stopped. It was replaced by a sound that echoed across the entire quad, amplified by the massive outdoor speakers used for graduation ceremonies. It was Julian's voice. The perception is that you are a dangerous, broken girl about to have a very long fall. Then Sarah's voice. Professor Vance didn't promise me a scholarship, Maya. He promised me your spot. Julian turned, his face pale as he looked down at the quad. The giant video screens, usually reserved for scrolling lists of donors, were now displaying a live feed from the bell tower security camera, the one Maya had hacked to bypass the blind spot Julian thought he was using. The entire university was watching. The dean, the donors, the students. Everyone was seeing the visionary Julian Vance trying to murder a student on the ledge of the bell tower. The snap hiss of the truth was finally loud enough for everyone to hear. Julian lunged, but he was too late. The sound of sirens, real sirens this time, from the city police, not campus security, approached from all sides. Blue and red lights reflected off the bronze bell, turning the tower into a kaleidoscope of justice. Maya stepped away from the ledge as the first team of officers burst through the door. Julian and Sarah were led away in handcuffs, their faces stark and ugly in the flashing lights. As the sun began to rise over Crestwood, Maya sat on the stone steps of the quad. She refused the blanket the paramedics offered. She didn't need warmth, she needed the air. She watched as the crime scene investigators carried out the crate from the basement, the IDs of the ghost graduates finally seeing the light of day. She realized then that her obsession with receipts and data hadn't just been a trauma response. It had been her training. She had learned that a paper trail could be destroyed, but a live broadcast was a force of nature. A week later, Maya stood on the porch of her family's home in Ohio. The air smelled of damp earth and drying corn stalks, an honest, simple smell that didn't hide any secrets. She looked out at the flat horizon, the gray sky feeling vast and full of possibility. She had lost her spot at Crestwood. Her research was tied up in a legal battle that would last years. She had no degree and no prestige. But as she reached into her pocket and pulled out a single, crumpled receipt for a bus ticket home, she smiled. She didn't need to scan it. She knew exactly where she was, and for the first time in her life, she knew exactly who she was. She was Maya Sterling, and she was finally off the record.